Oh, welcome back. I'm so glad you're here. Let's jump right into it because I know you are dying to know what our curriculum implications are based on all of this second language acquisition research. So let's jump right in. Based on decades of research, these truths are reasonably acceptable. First thing we need to look at. Only after a great deal of input exposure will students be able to use accurately morpheme endings, remember our beautiful Legos that make up language, that mark person, that mark tense, or anything that carries very little semantic weight. So these are the parts of your sentence that do not change a sentence's meaning, they just make it correct and sound natural to a native speaker. Also, gender and number when it does not change the content of the information. Same kind of deal. Bridge morphemes, meaning anything that connects two ideas, such as the usage of que or de for possession. Remember, this is back at us looking at the four morpheme studies for Spanish. There are, of course, similar things that have been founded by researchers in other languages as well. But I was presenting this to my department of mostly Spanish teachers, so I wanted to make it as relevant for them as possible. Also, accurate usage of ser versus estar. That takes a great deal of input. Now, I'm harping on this point here because this is something that literally still every day, understandably so, because it is really, really important in Spanish language. And there are other things similar to this. I know that there's a similar example of this in past tense for French with passé composé. This is something that's really important for learners of this language. What I'm arguing based off of these conclusions is that we shouldn't hold students accountable for the differences between ser versus estar the way that we traditionally do. Because if we can't expect from research that they're able to do it at an advanced level with certain instances of this crucial difference, maybe we should look at it a little bit differently. And maybe rather than expecting them to know the differences and memorize the rules, maybe we should ask them what it means or present it to them in a little bit of a sheltered input. Or maybe, just a thought, there's still very few people, at least in my department, that agree with me on this, but maybe we should teach them certain expressions with ser and certain expressions with estar, and then teach them later in the more advanced courses what the difference is between the two and why there are two versions of the same idea. Maybe. Just a thought. Think about it. Think about it. Seriously. Think about it. Anyways, before I get more on my soapbox, assessment. That's always the most important thing that we need to look at when we're talking about changing the curriculum, right? How can we make sure that our assessment is fair of students? Explicit teaching of morphological forms doesn't really comply with the current research. Now, we've got here a couple morpheme studies that were looked at specifically, but really in any of the research, there's not a lot that says that explicit teaching of these morphological forms is really going to be the thing that sticks in people's heads. Also, students cannot be held to an expectation that research proves they will not be able to achieve at a novice level. And ESL teachers, this is something that we need to think about specifically, is if you are teaching students who have very little exposure to the English language and you are looking at past tense forms or present tense S, maybe in a speaking task, it's just simply not possible for them at that level of low input to be able to produce that correctly. That's just not going to happen. The research has proven that that's not going to happen. And so it's not fair for us to expect it. And so our expectations need to also reflect that research. For Spanish teachers, we need to look at, once again, ser versus estar. We need to think very carefully about how we teach this, when we teach this, and exactly what we're going to hold accountable with our students. Because this is considered to be a late system bridge, meaning that it takes a great deal of input in order to understand. Also, everybody's favorite topic, gender errors. Gender errors of certain types, remember the ones that don't carry a lot of semantic weight, anything that doesn't have a lot of meaning, it's going to continue well into the advanced stages. I mean, I still make gender errors constantly. Oh, so this is my favorite part, y'all. We are coming to the exciting razzle-dazzle conclusion. This is the case for a realistic beginning level grammar syllabus. You can probably already imagine some of the things that I think should happen, but this article is from the perspective of a researcher who published her work in 2012 in ACTFL. With her research, she looked at students in high schools and universities and found that they are overwhelmingly voting with their feet when it comes to our world language programs. Why? World language has never been more important. We are in the digital age of connection between cultures. We are in an ultimate age of immigration and emigration and relocation. Language has never been more important to world cultures and to becoming a digital citizen as well as a world citizen. And kids more than ever think that this is important because they want jobs that are going to pay them better with their bilingual skills. So what on earth is going on here? Why are people still leaving? She found that after 2 semesters at the college level or 2 years at the high school, middle school, elementary school level, they still can't do anything communicative with their language. Most curriculums, I know all of the ones that I went through, even though I was at a stellar school when I was a kid, most curriculums are modeled after decades old approaches. And nobody is here to blame anybody for anything. I mean, teachers have enough on their plate. But all tenses and virtually all grammar concepts are taught within 4 years or 4 semesters in language courses. And I hope that after you've looked at a little bit of this research that you might be kind of starting to hint towards the idea that language acquisition truly is a science of time. It takes time in order to master these concepts. Students in the 70s and 80s really started to rekindle their excitement for communicative language because that was really a big movement that was happening. But they left the classroom in droves because they were promised with communicative language and we failed to deliver. World language classrooms have yet to fully recover. We still have a reputation for that. I mean, come on. How many times have you heard, oh, I took 4 years of such and such language and I really wish that I remembered it because now I can't use it. Like, what a waste of 4 years. What a waste. Classes were not structured for communication. And there's a strong need to look closer at especially our first year curriculums. First year is the first impression. For a lot of people, for a lot of kids, I say kids because I work with middle schoolers and high schoolers, we are the first impression that they have of learning a language. And if we don't succeed as presenting it as something that is a skill that they can really use, we lost them. They're going to move on to something else and they're going to say that this was just another course that they had to take rather than being a real skill that they could use. And here's the real uppercut. There is no research stating or supporting that all major grammar tenses and all other grammatical points and nuances must be taught in the first 2 semesters of a college course. Rather, there exists abundant studies in numerous fields, and this is not just second language acquisition, we're talking about learning in general here, that support a realistic grammar syllabus for beginner students because they are exactly what it says there, beginners. Here's what research does support. When you're looking at brain science and how to learn just in general, how our brains process new information, chunking. Presenting very small pieces of information at a time, slowly putting one little colored Lego on top of the other, and you will slowly build a castle. The necessity of rehearsal and meaningful association. And I have found in my experience teaching that when you give meaningful association to a skill, kids don't brain dump it. There's also a high reliance on perceived student importance of material. Now, directly from the article on page 98, it says here that this explains why world language students of today do not see the relevance of memorizing verb tenses and other grammar out of context. They need to rehearse the concepts in meaningful context before the concept is acquired. And we got our boy Vygotsky back in the house for theories and the importance of social interaction. We all remember Vygotsky from our intro to education courses. Vygotsky is the man with the plan who said that learning is very much a social process. We are designed to be social creatures for survival, and therefore we learn better that way. And we take away the social element when we're drilling verbs because language is a social skill. It is social capital. And if you are interested more in exactly what that means, I would love for you to check out a video called Baby Geniuses. I have a link to it on my website, and I can put it down here in the show notes as well. That shows you how important the social factor is in learning. I mean, it's amazing. The researcher shows a person reading a book in Chinese to a baby who speaks English, and then a recording of that same book being read to the same baby. And over the course of a few sessions, guess which one stuck more? Even though it was the exact same book, it was the human voice that stuck more with that baby. Also, the Foreign Service Institute, when looking at applicants for any kind of government work and their ability to use their language, they estimate that you need about 720 hours of exposure necessary for the average high aptitude learner to achieve superior in ideal conditions and advanced for average conditions. So compare that to less than 135 hours of a high school year, or maybe one semester of a college course of all level aptitudes like you see in my classroom and I know your classroom, mixed abilities, and frankly, less than ideal conditions. Because we all know how many distractions can be a part of any classroom. So we got a lot going against us. This is not going to be an isolated room of learners, right? And here we have the big conclusion here, that the time has come to create a realistic grammar syllabus in our beginning language courses. Yet, this is something we really have to contend with. Why do some in our profession insist that all grammar must be taught in the first year of language learning? Because, yeah, and they're great teachers and they exist. There's abundant data from decades of research that exists that overwhelmingly support not to do so, but rather to front load language learning with only the necessary grammar, such as high frequency structures, to have students communicate at a beginning appropriate level. Now, this is kind of the great mystery of our profession is we have these updates, we have the research, but we got a couple problems. A, not everybody has access to the research because I don't know, teachers are busy, man. And continuing education is expensive. So there's a problem in our field in that this research is not getting into the hands of the people who need it most, which is why I am presenting these videos so that other people might have access to this stuff too. Also, teachers who have heard the research and are protesting the updates have qualms against it, and they really, really need to be addressed because they are good qualms. They are reasonable arguments, and we need to take a look at them. Here's how teachers have protested updates so far. I don't know about you, but this is something that gets thrown around every language department that I've seen or worked with. If it was good enough for me, then it's good enough for my students. I'm a great language learner. I know how to do this, and I am now very proficient in the language that I teach. So if it worked for me, it's going to work for my kids. Yes and no. We cannot teach the way that we were taught. Times have changed. Our students have changed. They are different. I mean, you can even just look at the way kids process information. It's way different than kids in the 80s used to. And that doesn't have to do with the fact that our brains are different. Kids are no different than they were in the 70s. They're just used to different avenues of information. I mean, the post Sesame Street generation, they need to see a change of scenery every 7 minutes post Sesame Street. And kids nowadays, they need to see a change of scenery even more often. And students cannot sit in their seats all class period long and be expected to learn that material. That is just not true. A kid can only sit in a seat for the amount of minutes that is equivalent to their year of age. So if you teach 8-year-olds, they can only sit still for 8 minutes. If you teach 15-year-olds, 15 minutes, and then you got to switch it up. Also, few students think like instructors. What do I mean by that? Well, if you're looking at the people who end up being language teachers, it's the people who, I don't know, conjugate verbs in their spare time, like me, or who read in foreign languages because they simply enjoy it. I mean, that's not all of the kids in your classroom, right? We're the psycho nerds who love this stuff. Our kids are not wired like we are. They are not passionately obsessed with the language enough to make them a teacher. Few students think like instructors and want the same level and depth of explanation that we do. We are the language teachers. We want to understand the linguistics of the material. Most of your kids don't. Some of them do, for sure. Some of them do, but not all of them. Not your average kid. Definitely not. Second protest that we've got here. The old way of presenting more grammar is more rigorous than the new way, which waters down the curriculum. This is something that I hear all the time. This is also something that I've heard in meetings when presenting ideas about teaching proficiency. And I completely get it. It is a very, very genuine concern. But we need to really rethink the way that we think rigor in order for this explanation to really sink in and hit home. We cannot teach language like an academic skill, and we cannot expect that teaching rules about language is going to lead to rigorous language practice. Also, teaching rules is memorization, which in Bloom's taxonomy is honestly the lowest level. Using it is really where you're going to start rigorously challenging your kids. Interpreting native speakers' conversations is rigorous. Having students create comic strips based on a scene that they read in a book in the target language is rigorous. Learning how to conjugate verbs is not rigorous. ACTFL proficiency guidelines also, when working with language tasks in context, is a really, really high level. I mean, look at some of the descriptions that you've got here. We'll go down here for the third one to explain this further. The ACTFL guidelines require students to know grammar. Oh, yes. Very, very true. Very true. But it doesn't require students to conjugate or to identify the type of grammar that they are using. So think about that. What ACTFL requires for students to move from one level to another is the ability to use those specific tenses. So let's look at something here that is the difference between an intermediate and advanced learner. Narrating events in the past in a full paragraph discourse is far more complex than conjugating forms of irregular preterite for my Spanish friends or passé composé. Way, way, way more difficult. Teaching should focus on communication rather than the ability to describe the language phenomena. Describing language phenomena is linguistics. Being able to tell what on earth a demonstrative adjective or pronoun is and the difference between them is not communication. That is describing language phenomena. Knowing that difference is not going to make kids score higher on any type of ACTFL proficiency assessment. being able to use it is. Here's the important point that I would like to leave you with today. Language is a skill, not a subject. Don't teach your kids about the engine until they know how to drive. Yeah, understanding the engine and being able to diagram it is absolutely going to make you a better driver, but it does not teach you how to drive. Understanding the difference between ser and estar is absolutely going to help you to use it better, yes, but that's not going to teach you how to use it. It's not something that you can really put into place and work until you actually have some experience using the language. So teaching the ins and outs, these are my personal conclusions here, they are really important. But when you're talking about an engine, it's going to mean that they'll be able to diagram, take apart, and put back together an engine. It does not teach you how to drive. Driving teaches you how to drive. Teaching language students linguistics and terms and syntax and morphemes teaches them linguistics. It does not teach them how to communicate. And we only have a certain amount of time, people. Our precious and limited class time needs to be spent focusing on providing input. So what does this mean for us? These are the changes that need to be made based on the research. 1, change our student expectations to achieving communicative tasks rather than memorizing grammar forms. 2, teach grammar concepts that align with the proven orders of acquisition based on SLA research, in context, through input interaction. And 3 is adjust our teaching as well as our scope and sequence to retain world language students who leave our programs with real world communicative skills. Not, I took 4 years of this and I still don't know how to use it. And here are the references. I will leave this up for you to look at, and please, of course, feel free to browse through this research here as well as the other things on my website at LibreLanguageLearning.com. My mission is to make your job as a language teacher easier, to make this research easy to understand and put it back in the hands of the people who need it, because the work that you do in world language matters so much, and I want you to have the tools that you need in order to do that. If you're interested in more proficiency resources, browse my website at LibreLanguageLearning.com and also on Teachers Pay Teachers. And I am so glad that you joined me for this here, and I hope that you took something out of it that you can use tomorrow to help make your language life a little bit easier. And thank you so much for joining me. You the best. Welcome to the Wolang Clan, friends.